It is truly a great privilege and an honor for me to introduce the chief guest, Professor Asanga Thilakarathne, and it is as if fate or destiny had it written that we would meet the way we are at this meeting today. If my memory serves me right, we first met Professor Thilakarathne around the mid-1960s when he was ordained as a novice monk. I remember quite vividly the playful nature of this youngster, but no one failed to notice the shy, coy smile, but the steely determination in his eyes. He learned the Dhamma as if it was second nature to him, just like breathing in and breathing out, and his memory was truly phenomenal. And when the head monk proudly announced that his protege was placed first in the selection examination to the Bhikkhu University in Anuradhapura, we all rejoiced. He completed his studies with a first-class pass in 1974, by which time he had become a Tripitaka Vedi, acquiring competence in Sinhala, English, Pali, and Sanskrit, and I believe in Tamil too. The momentum that he had generated was unstoppable. He got his BA honors from the University of Peradeniya, which offered him an internal studentship, although he started as an external student. And it is the first ever time that a first-class honors degree was awarded to an external student. He proceeded to go to the USA to further his studies and obtained his MA in 1986 and his doctorate in 1992, both from the University of Hawaii. He has been the recipient of a fellowship from Oxford as well as from the East-West Center in Honolulu. Professor Thilakarathne has numerous publications both in Sinhala and English and has gone on to win state literary awards as well. He holds the chair and the professorship in Pali and Buddhist studies at the University of Colombo, having headed the department and held the chair at the Kelaniya University previously. He continues to serve on the Council of the World Buddhist University in Bangkok, as well as the Buddhist University and Pali University in Colombo. Professor Thilakarathne is truly a colossus of our times. I invite you, sir, to deliver your keynote address.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jnanisara Subasinghe, for those kind words. Venerable members of the Mahasangha, I notice here the members of Mahasangha not only belonging to the Sri Lankan Theravada tradition, but also to Thai Theravada tradition and Burmese Theravada tradition and Vietnamese Buddhist tradition and also Japanese Buddhist tradition, which would have made Dharamapala very happy, really. And also members of the Christian clergy, members of the civil and political leadership, His Excellency Ambassador to Sri Lanka, and all the scholars and distinguished guests assembled here. When I was watching this wonderful performance by the members of Sri Lankan, young members of Sri Lankan community, and also the performances of Dhamma school children, and the very eloquent speech. I remember in one of his, I think perhaps second visit, Dharamapala wrote in his diary that there was no one from Ceylon to welcome him when he arrived in here. So that was a situation almost about 100 years ago. But Dharamapala would have been very happy if he were today to see that there were so many Sri Lankan Buddhists in this country. Not only they are here, but also they are doing very well. So that would have made Dharamapala very happy. In this occasion, in fact, this whole occasion is a kind of symbol of what Dharmapala would have foresaw, imagined for this Buddhism for this country, and also Buddhism for Europe. And he would have been very pleased to notice that the vision he had is being materialized gradually. So I'm not going to deliver a long speech here today. In fact, I have written a fairly long speech, but if anyone is interested in that, you could obtain it from Venerable Sila Vimala there. But I'm just going to summarize, read a couple of paragraphs and summarize the main theme I want to lay emphasis on, and then wind up within possibly next 15 to 20 minutes. I deem it an honor to have been invited to deliver the keynote address at this August gathering, assembled to remember the 150th birth anniversary of Anagarika Dharmapala, who is responsible for the London Buddhist Vihara, the first ever Buddhist Vihara in the West. I should thank the Most Venerable Bogoda Sila Vimala, Nayakathera, head of the London Buddhist Vihara, and the commemoration committee who invited me to deliver this speech. I am failing in my duty if I do not mention the late Dr. Ananda Guruge, who was a respected friend of mine and who was scheduled to deliver this speech initially. Ananda Guruge, with his vast experience and expertise in Anagarika Dharmapala, and who has a number of major publications on Anagarika Dharmapala to his credit, both in Sinhala and English, perhaps could have been the most suitable person to undertake this task. Unfortunately, now that he has left us, I have been asked to reflect on Anagarika Dharmapala at this important occasion. I must acknowledge my indebtedness to Dr. Ananda Guruge, on whose writings I depend heavily for this presentation. Now, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to read this paper, but I will just try to summarize the main argument of this paper, which I have titled as Anagarika Dharmapala and his vision of a globalized Buddhism. Now, it is very interesting to see Anagarika Dharmapala is basically perceived as Sinhala Buddhist nationalist. But when we read his writings and when he read his diaries, you can see that. Of course, Anagarika Dharmapala was a many-sided person. His work was in Sri Lanka, then his work was in India, and then his work was in America, England, and in Europe. So there are three main areas. And when we look at Anagarika Dharmapala's writings, what he said and what he did, we can see that he had, although he was, on the one hand, his life, his work was very much centered on Sri Lanka and Sinhala Buddhism, but he was at the same time a very, very international figure who had a vision of what I would like to call globalized Buddhism. Now, this perspective of global application of Buddhism is something not unique to Dharmapala. Of course, it comes from the very heart of the philosophy of the Buddha. Now, we are told in the Buddha's life that as a prince, he was motivated to live his household life when he saw that this world, human beings, are in an unfortunate situation in which they are born and they die. And Siddhartha was wondering, what is the escape from this situation? So this was the basic insight that Siddhartha had, which made him to live household life. So the Pali language refers to this episode as Kichang Vatayang Loko. It refers to as Loka. So his very initial vision was, he was thinking about the nature of the world. So therefore this application of Buddhism, universal application of Buddhism, is not something originated from Dharmapala or with Dharmapala. It is part and parcel of Buddhist world vision. Nevertheless, we can see when we look at Anagarika Dharmapala's life, we can see that his initial background was very urban background. Both his parents were from the city, and then they were very much in the heart of the Buddhist activities. Henry Steele Olcott and Madame Blavatsky came to Sri Lanka as a result of seeing some reports of the Panuduravada. And when Henry Steele Olcott came, Anagarika Dharmapala, of course, youngster at that time, became his translator, helper, and everything. So this particular exposure to the West and Western ways of thinking and doing things, I think was a great training for Anagarika Dharmapala. And subsequently we see that Anagarika Dharmapala inherited this thinking. And from the very beginning you can see that his vision was, although he worked in Sri Lanka, his vision was global vision. Now we know that in 1891, when he went to India for the second time, first time he went to India with Henry Steele Olcott and Madame Blavatsky. The idea was to study theosophy, but for some reason or other, Madame Blavatsky persuaded him to study Pali and said that everything you need could be found in Pali. And then so Dharmapala's mind was turned again to Buddhism and Pali, and he came back to Sri Lanka. And then 1891 he went back to Adyar. Mainly, there were two things. Mainly he wanted to be a participant of this occasion when Henry Steele Olcott had come up with 14 points of Buddhism. Now this is again very important and interesting. These 14 points Henry Steele Olcott visualized to be shared by all the Buddhist traditions. Not only the Theravada Buddhist traditions, to all the Buddhist traditions. So there was an international meeting to ratify this document. Anagarika Dharmapala represented Most Venerable Hikkaduwe Sumangala in this meeting, with whose consent Anagarika Dharmapala took along with him to this meeting. And after this meeting, he went on a pilgrimage, and this is the first time he saw what has happened to the Buddhist shrines in India. And he was appalled to see the situation in Buddha Gaya. That was the beginning, or that was the basic incentive for him to establish, which was called Buddha Gaya Mahabodhi Society, which was later known as Mahabodhi Society. Now, before that, of course, in 1893, he went to United States, Chicago, the world-famous Parliament of Religion. Now, there is very interesting. In his address, he said the following: I bring to you the good wishes of 475 million of Buddhists, the blessings and the peace of the religious founder of that system, which has prevailed so many centuries in Asia, which had made Asia mild and which is today, in its 24th century of existence, the prevailing religion of those countries. Now, when you look at these words, when he says that I have brought the good wishes of 475 million Buddhists, we can see that he was not merely representing Sri Lanka Theravada Buddhists. His vision was that he was representing the entire Buddhist world. So that was his mission. And then, when he established the Mahabodhi Society, it's again very interesting to see that Mahabodhi Society, he appointed the board for this society. And he made Henry Steele Olcott to be the chief organizer of the society, president being Most Venerable Hikkaduwe Sumangala, and himself being the secretary. But the interesting thing is, in this board of Mahabodhi Society, he had His Holiness, Royal Holiness, Chandradhar Chaudhidhar, Prince of Siam, Right Reverend Suku Unisio, Shincho Kokuji Mejiro from Tokyo, Jokyoji Tira Machi, Sojo Sagaru of Tokyo, and there are a few others from Tokyo, and also Myung Pyo Maihin, maybe I'm not pronouncing correctly, from Burma, and then Krishna Chandra Chowdhury from Chittagong, and Muang Ha Pyu from Arakan. Now again, you can see that his first board of directors of Mahabodhi Society was an international board of directors. And he perceived Buddha Gaya as not merely something belonging to India or something belonging to Theravada Buddhist or something. So from the very beginning, his vision was to have a global participation for this. Now when he was appealing to Sri Lankan Buddhists to Buddha Gaya Bera Ganiu, Sinhalese save Buddha Gaya, but that was his request for Sinhalese people. But of course we know that his request for saving Buddha Gaya was not only for Sri Lanka, but it was for the entire world. And he established connection with many countries. He visited Japan. On his way from Chicago, he was in Honolulu, where he met Lady Mary Foster, who was his lifetime benefactress. And the amount of money she donated for his work is staggering even in numbers in today. So you can see that Dharmapala's vision was globalized Buddhism. So as I said earlier, global application of Buddhism is not something new, but it is one of the few people who articulated this vision is Anagarika Dharmapala. Now today, at the 150th birthday of completion of Anagarika Dharmapala, why we have to discuss Dharmapala? Of course, Dharmapala was again discussed in detail in this meeting. So much has been written on Dharmapala in many languages, in Sinhala, English, and so many writers. So Dharmapala is highly discussed subject. I mean, there is nothing virtually new to say about him. But my question for you today is, actually my question for you to think is, when we reflect on Dharmapala today, there must be a meaning for that. I mean, it's not merely to think about the past and reflect on the virtues of Dharmapala and then terminate the story. It must have some kind of implication for future. Now, when we look at Dharmapala's thinking, when he established London Buddhist Vihara, of course, that story is very well known. I'm not going to narrate it again. He had several very important plans along with establishing London Buddhist Vihara. One of the things was to hold a conference composed of chief Mahatheras of the three Nikayas to adopt methods to propagate Buddha Dhamma in European countries and to establish Buddha Sasana in England and America. Now he was thinking of terms of Sri Lanka. He was thinking of getting all the heads of the three Nikayas together and discuss how to establish Buddhism in United Kingdom and United States of America. With somewhat sadness, I like to note this evening that what Dharmapala wanted to do at the turn of last century, in fact, has not happened even up to today. Why I say this is, today I can see that a large number of monks from all over the world are in this country, and the Buddhism has really spread in this country to a considerable extent. But still I know that among Sri Lankan Buddhist Sangha, there is no consensus how to do things. Of course, I'm not saying this as a criticism, but what I'm saying is Anagarika Dharmapala thought of doing this when he established this vihara, London Buddhist Vihara in this country, 1926, to hold a joint conference of the three Nikayas. But of course, the idea was to extend it to the entire world Buddhism and create a kind of world Buddhism through his efforts. So there were, I don't want to go into the details of that. Then third thing is to invite the principal leading lay Buddhists to attend the above conference and to adopt measures to collect subscriptions and so on. And you can see that when he established London Buddhist Vihara, he had a much larger plan that goes beyond London Buddhist Vihara itself. Because he wanted to have global Buddhism established in the world. Now looking at current situation of United Kingdom alone, let me just quote from a recent author. A detailed analysis of groups, centers and organizations listed in the Buddhist Dictionary 1997-2000, so this is really 2000 and 2001, shows that by the end of the 20th century, there were over 30 different traditions or sub-traditions of Buddhism in Britain. 30 different traditions, with almost 1,000 Buddhist groups and centers in all. These were made up 454 East Asian, that is China, Korea and Japan, 300 Soka Gakkai, 111 Zen groups, 284 Tibetan, including 183 new Kadampa groups, and 124 Theravada and 58 unaffiliated groups. Now this is the situation of Buddhism by 2000 in this country. It's kind of interesting again. When Dharmapala established London Buddhist Vihara in 1926, that was the first ever Buddhist Vihara, not only Theravada Buddhist Vihara, first ever Buddhist Vihara in UK. And as you know, it's a Sri Lankan monks and Dharmapala, so it was a Theravada tradition. However, if you look at numbers today, Theravada Buddhist centers are only 124, contrasted with much larger numbers. Now again, I do not think that this should be any kind of number game, but it's interesting to see that how Buddhism has progressed in this country. Now when we look at Dharmapala's vision, we can see that in a way, Dharmapala would have been very happy today to see that Buddhism is spreading in this country. There are so many Buddhist groups in this country. Now, I think when Dharmapala visualized the kind of global Buddhism, and when he collaborated with Henry Steele Olcott on these 14 points, of course, there have been several other similar efforts to locate some kind of universally shareable basic principles of Buddhism. And Dharmapala was at forefront of it. And when in Sri Lanka in 1950s, Professor Mallasekara, late Professor Mallasekara established World Fellowship of Buddhists, of course, it was a direct result of Anagarika Dharmapala's vision. So we can see that this vision is gradually coming through. However, when we reflect on Dharmapala, I would like to say that still there is a lot of room and there is a need for the Buddhist. I'm not talking about only the Theravada Buddhists, I'm referring to all Buddhist communities in this country and also in the world. There is a need to Buddhists to get together and discuss and agree on the certain fundamental ways of doing things. Now, I'm sure the Venerable monks appreciate this because they know that there are a lot of practical difficulties sometimes when different groups of different traditions of Buddhist monks get together. There are these can be minor things, but still there are some very important practical issues to be discussed. Now, even when monks come in from Sri Lanka for Dharmadutta Seva, there is no agreed upon convention in Sri Lanka. So monks come and they set up their own standards and ways of doing things. Sometimes people like those things, some people don't like, and some people come under criticism, some people don't. I think this should not happen because there is always a way to, because we have a long history of having Sangayanas. We have had major 6 Sangayanas. But interestingly, some of the decisions Theravada tradition stuck up to today are the decisions that have been made right after 3 months of the parinirvana of the Buddha. That means ever since, some of the decisions have not been revised, or relooked at. Now, this means that we need to revive, at least the Western Buddhists will have to revive this practice of holding Sangayanas. Now, it is just not to chant the Tripitaka. Of course, that's important, but just to discuss basic common issues and get into some kind of provisional, because in the Buddhist tradition we have to also remember that Sangha is a decentralized organization, so they can have their own conventions, but at the same time it is very important for us Buddhists to get together and discuss these things. And also, one last point, being faithful, appreciative of Anagarika Dharmapala, he has made it very clear that by propagating Buddhism in the West, he was not talking about really converting people into Buddhism. Now, this is something very important. Dharmapala had this deep thought, like early last century, and he was not into the conversion. He was into teaching Buddhism. And he at some time, he said that Britain Empire has given Sri Lanka so much. So therefore it is time for the Sri Lankans to give something back to Britain. Now, that something to be given back to Britain was Buddhism. So that is what he thought. But it is not a kind of thinking of this number game that we are witnessing today. So therefore, to interpret Anagarika Dharmapala's effort to propagate Buddhism in the West or in the America is not really to increase the numbers of the Buddhists all over the world. But he had, I think, more sublime. I remember just what Venerable Ajahn said about His Holiness Dalai Lama. So the main point is not to propagate, the numbers, not to increase the number, but to propagate the goodness. And Dharmapala's vision goes along in that line very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Venerable Sangha, I don't want to go into details of this. So this universal vision of Dharmapala is to be promoted today. And the challenge is how the different Buddhist traditions keep their traditions intact, because each tradition is so beautiful. So those beautiful things in traditions have to be preserved. But at the same time, there must be awareness of the globalness of Buddhism and global approach to Buddhism, so that Buddhists can get together as a global force, of course, not to show the power, but to show the power of goodness. Now let me just read what I wrote as my concluding remarks and conclude these few words. Anagarika Dharmapala was a many-sided person with indefatigable urge to work. As I mentioned at the outset of this discussion, he had 3 arenas for his activism: Ceylon, as it was called those days, India, and the West. While striving to establish London Buddhist Vihara, Anagarika Dharmapala was having an eye on his work of building the Vihara Mulagandha Kuti, which was completed before he passed away in 1933. His local work was thought out in global terms. That is the reason why his activities in the colonial Ceylon, India and the West were interlinked. Buddhism in the UK was only the beginning point for him, and he conceptualized a Buddhist future for the entire Europe. Anagarika Dharmapala's concept of Buddhist Europe was not a result of converting people by following methods similar to those practiced sometimes by Christian missionaries in colonial Ceylon. Instead, Anagarika Dharmapala believed in reason and scientific knowledge. Anagarika Dharmapala would be very unhappy to see that still religions are thriving, increasing their numbers, and that they follow means not acceptable to the very religions they strive to propagate. On the other hand, however, Anagarika Dharmapala would be very pleased to see that the Buddhist missionaries are not overly enthusiastic. I'm referring to the Buddhist missionaries like our venerable monks here today. The Buddhist missionaries are not overly enthusiastic about conversion, and that they do not follow in their effort to propagate Buddhism any means that go against the teaching they uphold. I think this is the last respect we can pay to Anagarika Dharmapala, and if we are really interested in really respecting him, following this universal, urge to establish Buddhism universally as a force of goodness and not as a religion of conversion. Thank you very much.